In tonight's episode, we're traveling deep into the shadows of Asia, where three chilling tales wait to unfold. One of them comes from a tropical paradise that hides a curse beneath its beauty. This story takes us to Langkawi, an island known for turquoise waters, white sands, and whispers of a woman whose final breath changed its fate forever. Locals still speak her name in hushed tones. Masuri, a figure of beauty, innocence, and unimaginable tragedy. They say her death was marked by something impossible, and her last words sealed the island's destiny for generations. What happened to her? And why do some believe the curse still lingers today? Let's begin. Langkawi may look like a postcard, but behind the picture-perfect beaches lies a story the locals will never let die. It begins over 2 centuries ago in a quiet Malay village surrounded by rice fields and the steady hum of cicadas. Here lived Masuri, the daughter of immigrants, a young woman so striking that even strangers would stop and stare. Her beauty was matched only by her kindness, and in the small, tight-knit community, she became a symbol of grace. But beauty draws not only admiration, it also breeds envy. Whispers began to spread, quiet at first, then louder, that Masuri had been unfaithful while her husband was away at war. There was no proof, no witness, only the sharp sting of jealousy from those who resented the way her presence lit up a room. The accusations twisted through the village like smoke, impossible to catch, impossible to stop. The setting was idyllic on the surface, palm trees swaying in the warm wind, the ocean glimmering under the sun, but beneath it, tension was building. Masuri's life, once peaceful, was narrowing to a single point, one where the truth no longer mattered. The elders of the village, their faces weathered by years of superstition and tradition, decided her fate long before she could speak in her own defense. And so, in the place she had always called home, surrounded by neighbors she had known since childhood, Masuri stood accused of a crime she did not commit. The island's beauty could no longer hide the shadow creeping in, a shadow that would soon swallow not only her life, but the future of Langkawi itself. The day of Masuri's judgment began like any other, the air thick with heat, the scent of wet earth after the morning rain. But something was different. The villagers avoided her gaze as she walked past, their conversations dropping to uneasy silence. Even the children, usually drawn to her gentle smile, clung to their mother's sarongs and kept their distance. It was as though the entire village knew something she didn't, and they were afraid to be near her when it happened. She was summoned to the village square under the guise of answering questions. Mahsuri had nothing to hide, but as she approached the gathering, her heart pounded with a feeling she couldn't name. The elders sat in a rigid half-circle, their eyes sharp and unyielding, the sky above them bruising with the early signs of an oncoming storm. She tried to read their faces, to search for a single familiar kindness, but all she found was a cold certainty that chilled her more than the wind ever could. The accusations came quickly, without pause, without room for her to defend herself. A neighbor claimed to have seen things. Another swore they had heard voices in the night. The words tangled together, building a story that didn't exist, one where Masuri was unfaithful, disloyal, dangerous. And yet, she could feel it. This wasn't about truth. It was about something deeper, something unspoken, something that had been waiting for the right excuse to surface. There was an unease in the air that went beyond the villagers' stares. A lone crow landed on the roof of the meeting hall and let out a harsh, grating cry that silenced the crowd for a moment too long. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howled, a long, mournful sound that prickled the skin on her arms. Masuri didn't know it yet, but the trial had never been about justice. This was the beginning of something far older than rumor. A story that had been whispered into the roots of Langkawi's soil long before she was born, and the island, it seemed, was ready to collect its due. The storm clouds thickened overhead, turning the village into a dim, unnatural twilight. The air grew heavy, almost hard to breathe, as if the island itself were holding its breath. Masuri stood in the center of the square, her voice breaking as she swore her innocence. But each word seemed to make the crowd lean farther away, as though her very presence carried a stain they could not see. From behind the elders stepped the Penghulu, the village chief, a man with a deep frown carved permanently into his face. He had always been a figure of authority, respected and feared in equal measure. But today, his gaze held something colder, a satisfaction she couldn't understand. He recited the accusations in a slow, deliberate tone, as though each word was meant to bind her tighter to an unseen fate. Then came the second strange thing, An elderly woman at the edge of the crowd, her hands trembling, called out for them to stop. She warned them that spilling innocent blood would bring darkness to Langkawi. Her voice cracked with desperation. But before Masuri could meet her eyes, two younger men dragged the woman away, their faces stiff with fear. The crowd watched without a word, as though pretending it hadn't happened. The rain began, soft at first, then building into a steady curtain that blurred the edges of the world. In the downpour, Masuri could see the faces of people she had grown up with, neighbors, childhood friends, but they no longer looked like themselves. Their eyes were vacant, their movements strange, as though something had hollowed them out from the inside. A whisper reached her through the rain, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. It came from somewhere behind the crowd, a man's voice saying, "Leave before nightfall, or you'll never leave at all." She turned, searching for the speaker, but saw only shifting shadows. Every instinct told her to run, but the elders had already made their decision, and the path out of the square was now a wall of bodies, faces turned to stone. Whatever was coming, there would be no escaping it. The rain became a roar, drumming against the earth so hard it felt like the ground might give way. The villagers closed in, their silhouettes dark against the flicker of lightning. Masuri's breaths came in sharp bursts, her chest tightening as two men seized her arms. She struggled, but their grip was iron. The crowd moved with them, as if drawn by some invisible command, toward a raised platform at the edge of the square. On it stood the penghulu, holding a long curved dagger. Its blade caught the lightning in brief flashes, and for an instant, it seemed to shimmer red, though no blood had touched it yet. A hush fell over the gathering, the only sound the relentless hiss of rain. Masuri's mind raced. She searched for reason, for anything that could break the spell over the people she had once called her family. But when she looked into their eyes, she saw only emptiness, as if their souls had retreated somewhere she could not reach. The old woman who had been dragged away earlier suddenly reappeared at the edge of the square, her hair plastered to her face, screaming a warning. "If you take her blood, the island will suffer. 7 generations will pay for this." But her voice was swallowed by the wind, and the crowd did not turn. The penghulu stepped forward, lifting the dagger. For a moment the world seemed to hold still. Masuri's fear turned to something else, a cold clarity. She realized they were not acting out of anger alone. This was ritual. This was sacrifice. And she was the offering. The dagger came down. But instead of the expected crimson, a milky white liquid welled from the wound, stark against the dark wood of the platform. Gasps rippled through the crowd. In that instant, Mahsuri's innocence was undeniable, and so was the curse forming on her lips. The rain seemed to pause mid-air, every droplet hanging heavy in the silence that followed. The white blood ran in thin streams down Mahsuri's side, pooling on the wooden boards like spilled milk. The villagers stared, their expressions twisting from triumph to shock, from certainty to doubt. They had expected guilt to stain her red, but instead, they were confronted with proof of her purity. Masuri's breath came ragged, but her voice was steady. She lifted her head and met the penghulu's gaze, her eyes no longer pleading but burning with something deeper. "You have taken an innocent life," she said, each word cutting through the storm. "For this, Langkawi will know no peace. For 7 generations, your land will bear the weight of your cruelty." Some in the crowd flinched, as if the words themselves carried a physical force. The old woman's earlier warnings now echoed in every mind. The strange way the villagers had acted, the fear in their eyes, the whispers in the rain, it all took on a new meaning. It wasn't just jealousy that had driven them, it was fear of what Masuri represented. Lightning split the sky, revealing the island's lush hills and quiet fields in a stark, otherworldly light. In that flash, it was easy to imagine those same fields trampled by invaders, the same hills scarred by war. The vision felt almost real, as if Masuri's curse had already begun weaving itself into the land. The penghulu stepped back, his face pale, but it was too late. The dagger slipped from his hand, clattering against the boards. Masuri collapsed, her white blood mingling with the rainwater rushing toward the edges of the platform. Her final breath left her lips like a whisper, carrying her curse into the wind, a promise that what had begun that night would echo far beyond her death. The storm broke in a single deafening crack of thunder, sending the crowd scattering in every direction. Masuri's body lay still on the platform, her white blood swirling into the muddy water below. The old woman knelt beside her, pressing a trembling hand to the lifeless face, whispering prayers no one else could hear. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the village was silent. Crops began to fail, livestock grew sick, and soon word came of warships approaching from beyond the horizon. The first of many tragedies had arrived, just as Masuri had promised. Generations later, when Langkawi finally began to thrive again, some said the curse had lifted. But others claimed the island still carried her shadow, that sometimes, on nights when the rain falls heavy, a pale figure walks the old village paths, her white blood staining the earth all over again. But Masuri's curse is only one of the shadows cast across these lands. For every island touched by tragedy, there are forests and rivers that hold their own secrets, secrets as heavy and unyielding as stone. Our next tale takes us to the lush, humid heart of Pahang, where the earth hides shapes that look eerily like frozen villagers, their faces caught in silent screams. Locals will tell you they were once alive, until they crossed paths with a being far older and far more dangerous than any human enemy. A giantess with the power to turn life into lifeless rock with nothing more than a greeting. Her name is still spoken with caution, for even in legend, Sangkelambai is not a creature you want to meet. Deep in the state of Pahang, where the jungle breathes in slow, humid sighs and the rivers twist like coiled serpents, the villagers still speak of Sangkelambai. She was not a spirit that lingered unseen in shadows. She was colossal, towering over treetops, her footsteps shaking the ground. Her skin was said to be the color of wet earth, her hair long and wild like vines, and her voice carried a strange power that could snuff out life in an instant. No one knew exactly where she came from. Some claimed she was born from the mountains, others swore she had walked out of the sea one night, following the moon. But everyone agreed on one thing: her greeting was a death sentence. She didn't need claws or weapons. A simple hello was enough to turn a living being into cold, unfeeling stone. For years, she wandered the forests and riverbanks, rarely crossing into human territory, but hunger, loneliness, or perhaps curiosity eventually brought her closer to the villages. At first, she only appeared at the edges, a shadow between trees, a silhouette against the horizon. Then one day, she stepped right into the heart of a settlement. The villagers froze, knowing that one wrong word, one wrong glance could seal their fate. They had heard stories of unlucky travelers who stumbled across her path, of fishermen found stiff and grey on their boats, of deer and birds frozen mid-step. And now, Sangkelambai was here, her eyes sweeping over them with a strange mixture of wonder and something far more dangerous. The first time Sangkelambai spoke, it was almost gentle, a deep, resonant greeting that rolled through the air like distant thunder. But the moment the words left her lips, the change was immediate. A rooster that had been strutting near the cooking fires froze mid-step, its wings half spread, beak open in a silent crow. A dog barked once before its voice cut off, its body locked in place, as though carved from granite. Even the leaves beneath their paws seemed to harden into stone. The villagers gasped, pulling their children close. No one dared respond to her, but Sangkelambai didn't seem angry. Instead, she looked puzzled, as if she didn't understand why her friendly greeting was met with fear. She tried again, this time directing her voice toward a young man who had been staring wide-eyed from the edge of the crowd. His lips trembled as he whispered a greeting back, and in an instant, his eyes went glassy, his skin losing all color as his body stiffened into lifeless rock. A murmur of terror swept through the crowd, but no one ran. Something about her towering figure, the slow sway of her head as she observed them, made it impossible to move. It wasn't rage holding them in place, it was something stranger, a heavy, unnatural stillness, like the air just before an earthquake. She took a step forward, and the ground groaned under her weight. The villagers stumbled back, their eyes darting to the now stone bodies scattered around them. And then came the question, whispered among the trembling crowd. Why was she here? She had lived in the deep jungle for as long as anyone could remember. Why now? No one had an answer, but one thing was certain. If they didn't find a way to outwit her, the village would soon be nothing more than another strange rock formation in the heart of Pahang. The air grew thick and hot, the kind of heat that made the skin prickle. Sangkelambai's shadow stretched over the huts, her head slowly turning as if she were memorizing every face. The villagers dared not speak, knowing even the smallest word might draw her attention. Then, without warning, she crouched low and reached out toward a cluster of chickens scratching in the dirt. Her fingers brushed one, and in a heartbeat, every single bird solidified into rough, lifeless stone. Panic rippled through the crowd, but a man stepped forward. He was the village headman, broad-shouldered and stubborn, a man not easily intimidated. "You must leave," he told her, his voice trembling despite his efforts to sound firm. "This is not your home." Sankalembai's expression shifted, not to anger, but to something colder, hurt. She tilted her head, as though weighing his words, then greeted him softly. The transformation was instant. The headman's body locked, his skin hardening to dull grey. The sound of his stone form striking the earth echoed through the clearing. Somewhere behind the crowd, an old storyteller muttered a warning, a half-forgotten tale about the giantess. "She is lonely," the woman whispered. "But her loneliness kills. Trick her mind, and you might save yourselves." Few heard her, but those who did exchanged quick, desperate glances. The children began to cry, their small voices carrying dangerously through the heavy air. Sankalembai's gaze drifted toward them, and several mothers clamped their hands over tiny mouths. One child broke free, stumbling toward the safety of a hut, but the giantess's eyes followed him with unsettling curiosity. That was when the storyteller spoke louder, catching the attention of the nearest men. "If she greets what she cannot understand, she will flee." Her voice shook, but her meaning was clear. They would have to show Sankalembai something so strange, so impossible, that it would drive her back into the jungle. The plan formed quickly, but time was running out. The giantess was already stepping closer, her shadow swallowing the last patch of sunlight in the village square. The villagers moved with frantic precision, their fear sharpening into action. A group of men rushed into one of the larger huts, returning moments later with a massive woven cradle. Inside it, wrapped in cloth and banana leaves, was a baby the size of a small buffalo. Its limbs were crude logs, its head a hollowed-out gourd painted with human features. Two men strained under its weight, swaying as though the child were impossibly heavy. Sankalembai froze at the sight. Her immense eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. She straightened to her full height, the trees behind her bending in the windless air as she took a step back. "Whose child is that?" she rumbled, her voice quivering in a way no one had heard before. Before she could move closer, another group appeared, dragging enormous tortoises with ropes. The shells were polished to a gleam, glistening in the sunlight that filtered through the treetops. They were made to crawl in slow, deliberate circles around the giant baby, the sound of their claws scratching against the packed earth filling the tense silence. Sankalembai's face twisted with something between fear and confusion. She looked from the strange infant to the tortoises, her eyes darting as though trying to piece together a puzzle she had no hope of solving. She muttered to herself, her words low and disjointed, before letting out a shuddering breath. Then she stepped back again. And again. The ground trembled under each retreating step. She didn't turn her back, she simply kept moving, as if the very sight before her was something she could not bear to approach. The villagers held their breath, watching the towering figure disappear into the thick curtain of jungle. But even as relief began to bloom, one thought lingered, unspoken but shared by all. What exactly had they just driven away? The jungle swallowed Sankalembai whole, her massive form fading into shifting shadows until only the faint tremor of her footsteps remained. The villagers stayed frozen in place, uncertain if she might reappear. When the final echo of her movement died away, the old storyteller stepped forward, her voice low but firm. "She fears what she cannot understand," the woman said, looking at the cradle and the circling tortoises. To her, a baby larger than herself is an omen. It tells her she is not the only giant in this world, and perhaps not the strongest. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. None had considered the possibility that the giantess, so terrifying in her power, could also be ruled by fear. The storyteller went on, explaining that Sankalembai's gift, or curse, was not something she could control. Her greetings were meant in kindness, but the magic in her words was fatal to anything living. That was why she kept to the jungle, why she avoided people, until her loneliness pushed her too close. The giant baby and the tortoises had worked not because they were threatening, but because they were strange. They disrupted her understanding of the world, forced her to question her place in it. And in that uncertainty, she had chosen to leave. The villagers dismantled the cradle and led the tortoises back to the riverbank. Still, as they moved through the village, their eyes drifted often to the tree line. No one knew if Sankalembai would ever return. Some swore that, at night, they could still hear her in the distance, not the heavy tread of footsteps, but the faint, mournful sound of someone calling a greeting into the dark, hoping for an answer that would never come. For weeks after Sangkelambai's retreat, the village lived in uneasy peace. The fields flourished, the animals grazed without turning to stone, and life returned to its rhythm. But no one dared speak her name aloud, as though even the sound might draw her back. One night, under a swollen moon, a fisherman returned late from the river. He swore he saw a shape moving among the trees, impossibly tall, swaying gently as if searching. Then came the sound, a soft, echoing greeting that rolled across the water. It was almost kind. Almost. The next morning, a new stone figure stood at the edge of the jungle, the fisherman himself, his face frozen mid-smile. From then on, the villagers knew one thing. Sangkalembai might have left, but she had not forgotten. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, she was still calling out, waiting for someone to answer. 2 curses down, but our journey into Asia's darker legends isn't over yet. We've walked through the rain-soaked tragedy of Masuri and stood in the shadow of Sangkalembai, the giantess whose greeting could turn life to stone. But now, we leave the villages and jungles behind, heading out to sea, toward a place the locals call Pulau Jahat, or Wicked Island. On maps, it's just a small, unassuming patch of land off the Malaysian coast. In stories, it's something far more dangerous. Beneath its tangled trees lies the tomb of a witch doctor named Mera, sealed away so his spirit could never return to the mainland. They say he cannot cross water, but disturb his resting place, and no ocean will be wide enough to keep you safe. Langkawi is the kind of place that lures you in with its postcard perfection, golden beaches, swaying palms, and the soft hum of waves against the shore. But in the quiet heart of the island, far from the tourist resorts, the locals tell a story that turns that beauty cold. It begins more than 200 years ago in a small Malay village, where rice fields stretched to the horizon and the air was thick with the scent of blooming frangipani. Here lived Masuri, the daughter of immigrants, known for her beauty and grace. Her eyes were dark as the island's night skies, her smile enough to still an argument before it began. She had married into a respected family, and while her husband was away serving as a warrior, she tended to her home and community. By all accounts, she was admired, perhaps too admired, because admiration, in time, curdled into envy. Whispers began to creep through the village, hushed at first, then sharp and loud enough for her to hear. They accused her of betrayal, of meeting another man, in her husband's absence. There was no evidence, only the simmering jealousy of those who could not match her beauty or kindness. The island's lush hills and calm waters masked a growing tension. Masuri's once safe home now felt like a place where every shadow held suspicion, where every friendly smile might be hiding a knife. And the elders, bound by tradition and superstition, were ready to act whether she was guilty or not. The paradise of Langkawi was about to become the stage for a tragedy that would echo for generations. The day of her summons began like any other, the air warm and heavy, the cicadas buzzing in the distance. Yet, as Masuri walked through the village, something felt wrong. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when she passed. Neighbors who once greeted her with warmth now averted their eyes, their faces drawn and tight. Even the children, who usually trailed after her with laughter, stayed close to their mothers, clutching at their sarongs as if she carried some unseen sickness. Word had spread that the elders wished to question her. Masuri, holding her head high, believed reason would prevail. She had nothing to hide. But when she arrived at the open square where disputes were settled, her heart sank. The space was crowded, every villager pressed in close, their eyes fixed on her with a mix of suspicion and something darker, anticipation. The elders sat in a half-circle at the front, their weathered faces grim. At the center stood the Penghulu, the village chief, his hand resting on a carved walking stick like a judge ready to pass sentence. Masuri searched the faces before her for even one friendly ally, but found none. The accusations came fast. One woman claimed to have seen Masuri meeting with a stranger. Another swore she heard voices behind closed doors at night. Each statement was thin, almost laughably so, but the crowd drank in every word. It wasn't truth they were chasing. It was a verdict they had already decided. And then came the first truly strange moment. From the edge of the gathering, an old woman's voice rang out, sharp and trembling. She warned them that to harm an innocent was to curse the land itself. But before Masuri could meet her gaze, 2 young men moved quickly to silence her, dragging her away. The warning lingered in the air, a cold thread winding through the heat of the day. Masuri didn't yet know what it meant, but she could feel it. Something larger than rumor was moving beneath the surface, and it had already set its sights on her. The air in the square grew heavier, pressing down on Masuri's shoulders like a physical weight. Clouds gathered above, dimming the afternoon sun, and the breeze that had been moving through the palms fell away into a tense stillness. The Penghulu stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. He was a man of authority, but also of pride, and in this moment he seemed to relish the power he held over her. He demanded she confess, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. Masuri stood her ground, insisting on her innocence, but each denial seemed to harden the faces around her. The villagers whispered, leaning close to one another, their glances darting between her and the elders. Then came the second strange occurrence. From somewhere beyond the gathered crowd came the sudden cry of a bird, sharp, loud, and unnerving. A lone white heron swept low over the square, its wings flashing pale against the darkening sky. It circled once, twice, before vanishing behind the rooftops. The moment it disappeared, the old woman's voice called out again from somewhere unseen, "The island will bleed with her if you spill her blood." A shiver ran through the crowd, but the Penghulu's expression did not waver. Instead, he turned to the villagers and told them that the woman's warnings were the mutterings of someone touched by madness. He urged them not to be swayed. One man, younger and braver than most, stepped forward in protest. He insisted they investigate further before making such a grave decision. But the Penghulu's glare silenced him. The crowd shifted again, closing tighter around Masuri, as though the decision had already been made. In that moment, Masuri realized the trial was nothing more than theater. The verdict was carved in stone before she even arrived. Still, the old woman's words gnawed at her. They were more than superstition. They felt like a warning of something vast and unstoppable, something that stretched far beyond her own fate. And as the first drops of rain began to fall, she understood. Whatever was coming would not end with her, it would take the island too. The rain began as a whisper, pattering on the thatched roofs, before swelling into a steady roar that blurred the edges of the square. Masuri stood motionless as two men stepped forward, each gripping one of her arms. Their faces were blank, their eyes fixed straight ahead, as if they no longer saw her as a person at all. The crowd parted to reveal a raised wooden platform. Upon it stood the Penghulu, his robes clinging to him in the downpour, a long, curved dagger glinting in his hand. Lightning flashed, catching the blade for a split second, and in that instant it seemed to glow red, though no blood had yet touched it. Masuri's pulse thundered in her ears. She scanned the crowd for a single ally, but all she saw were the same hollow stares. And then, through the sheets of rain, the old woman appeared once more at the edge of the gathering. Her voice cracked, but carried with eerie clarity. "If you take her blood, the land will choke. 7 generations will suffer." The Penghulu ignored her. He stepped closer, raising the dagger. The air felt charged, as though the storm itself was watching. Mahsuri's fear shifted into a cold, burning clarity. She understood now. This was no trial, no justice. This was ritual. She was the offering. The blade came down, but instead of the deep crimson that should have spilled, a milky white fluid welled from the wound, glistening against her skin. Gasps rippled through the crowd, shock slicing through their certainty. In that moment, the truth was undeniable. She was innocent. And as the rain hammered down, Masuri lifted her head, her lips already forming the curse that would seal the island's fate. The crowd stood frozen, the storm swirling around them, eyes locked on the impossible sight before them. White blood, pure and untainted, spilling onto the platform. It ran in thin rivulets, pooling at Masuri's feet, glowing almost silver in the flashes of lightning. Murmurs rippled through the villagers, their certainty crumbling with each passing second. Masuri's breath came slow, deliberate, her voice steady despite the pain. She raised her gaze to the Penghulu, and in that moment, there was no fear in her. Only the weight of a truth they could no longer deny. "You have killed the innocent," she said, each word slicing through the rain. "And for this, Langkawi will know no peace. For 7 generations, misfortune will shadow your land." Some recoiled at her words, as though they carried a physical force. The old woman's earlier warnings now rang like prophecy in their minds. Every strange occurrence of the day, the silent villagers, the heron's cry, the sudden storm, taking on a darker meaning. This was not just an execution. This was the unsealing of something ancient. Lightning lit the hills and rice fields beyond the village, and for an instant, Masuri could see them as they might be, burned, flooded, trampled by enemies yet to come. She knew then that her curse would live long after her, carried in the soil, the sea, and the wind. The Penghulu stepped back, his face pale, his grip on the dagger faltering, but it no longer mattered. The damage had been done. As her strength drained away, Masuri let her final breath slip into the storm, a whisper that curled through the air, impossible to catch, impossible to stop. And in that whisper, the island's fate was sealed. The thunder cracked so loud it seemed to shake the ground, and the villagers scattered, leaving Masuri's body alone on the rain-soaked platform. Her white blood mixed with the muddy water, winding its way down into the earth as if the island itself were drinking it in. By dawn, the storm had passed, but Langkawi was not the same. Crops withered without reason, fishermen returned with empty nets. And far beyond the shoreline, dark sails appeared, the first of many invaders to come. Years turned into decades, and the curse claimed generation after generation. Only when the seventh had passed did the island begin to breathe freely again. But even now, on nights when rain lashes the earth and lightning splits the sky, some claim to see a pale figure walking the old village paths, her lips moving as if she's still cursing those who wronged her. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you like them and want to listen to more, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best.